So good morning. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining in this summertime period. Well, it's not really summertime here in Belgium, in Leuven. It's a bit rainy and cloudy, but at least it's a holiday period for those who have holidays. So not for us, not for you, especially those who are participating in this early morning webinar. So thanks for joining in. My name is Ulrich Saldersacht. I'm a managing director for LSEC, which is an association of IT security companies. We are operating from out of Leuven and also broadcasting this and recording this from out of Leuven. So thanks for joining in. We have a series of webinars that we started quite some time ago. Today we had the focus on identity and access management in 2020 and beyond. But we see that actually more as a means to an end, so not really therefore needed to be in the topic in utmost detail. However, the topic that we have for you today is relevant also in that space of identity and access management. It's about zero trust, basically. And that's, of course, the first thing that we do if we meet with somebody. Can you trust a specific person? Can you trust me for being here, for representing, in this case, the association and LSEC? And I have a couple of credentials that support this on the left and the right side of myself. So we have a couple of banners that at least indicate a bit that we are doing this quite already for some time. So with these credentials, I think you can see that there's a little bit of impact that makes sense, and that also proves, in any case, that I am a verifiable person. Whether I'm a trusted person is maybe something else, but that brings us to the topic of zero trust. So zero trust, in essence, is something that exists already for quite some time. Either you trust somebody or you don't. In essence, it's really either you trust the system or an entity or an organization, or you don't. In the domain of information security, there is usually a form of trust involved, and we have to have these different components that we need to trust somehow. Either it's the identity, it's the system, it's the communication layer, the application, or even the data. Can we trust the data that's being transmitted to us? And the simple question there is, hasn't anybody been tampering with my data for that matter? So we can also turn that around, and we can also consider an architecture or an idea where there is zero trust. So how do we have to basically accomplish this? It's one of the challenges and the questions that we have today. The traditional CIA model usually goes out from the fact that there is a level of trust, but it needs to be verified, and it can sometimes also be verified, but not always. So guiding principles of zero trust has to do then with the verification of it, the explicit verification. So as I was just showing, I can help you in verifying the fact that I am who I say and claim I am. The least privileged access is a better way of providing, instead of just allowing access to anything and everything, and assume that there is always a breach that can happen. So those are some guiding principles of this untrustworthiness that sometimes is being promoted. Now, is this a principle that can withstand also the challenge of time and the challenge of practicalities? Well, that's one of the challenges that we are trying to figure out this morning, and trying to see whether there are systems that can help us actually getting that level of zero trust, and that basically from the other systems that need to help us understand and proving that they are trustworthy. But then the question becomes, how do we do that in an operational network, an operational model in a systems and ICT system environment, where there's different components, when there's different elements that we fundamentally are trusting today. And we see, of course, that there's a migration towards barriers that are being relieved, basically the perimeters which are being dissolved, especially when we go into cloud, or when we are using, like in this case, in an operational system, IoT devices. So then it becomes a little bit more challenging, of course. Already in 2013, NIST has come up with this basic modeling 857, I think it was, under the concept of zero trust model. I think our guest speaker of today will be detailing that a little bit further. But there's a couple of components that I just would like to add. And the first component here is that zero trust is definitely applicable to identities. It's applicable to policies, to infrastructure applications and data, and of course then the network where I started off with. So taking that one step further, you can have an architecture under that constraint where we need to build networks from the inside out. So figuring out not only from the outside in on how it needs to work, but rebuilding everything in the concept that basically nothing really should be trusted. And that then brings us into, for instance, network environment, into some basic components. So one of the basic components is that there is a form of a segmentation gateway, something that also controls the different segments, and then of course the segmentation by itself. So every of those different components needs to be not on the same data layer, but at least to try to segment this on a partially physical or maybe even on a virtual basis, whatever is better and more useful. Doing that also on a user level, and then doing that also on an application level. So that's the next big challenge. When it comes to identities, it's really a challenge of how can we define such a person within our identity. Can we find the necessary means for him to prove that that he's capable and allowed to access our environments, our networks, our premises, and so forth. So it really brings us down again to the concept of multi-factor authentication, different levels of access control, and role-based access control in this case. So the traditional concepts that we are applying, at least within these identity and access management webinars. So that brings us back a little bit to where we are and who we are. So LSEC is an association of IT security companies. It has been around for nearly 2 decades. We try to bring some knowledge and experience to our community, our stakeholders of both enterprise end users, government institutions, and basically also the community of the experts. And there's quite a number of different types of experts. We have identity and access experts. We have experts in the domain of policy and compliance. And we have experts in the domain, for instance, of network security and application security. So we bring all of these together and we try to challenge different vertical domains and how to come up with solutions to those different challenges, like for instance, here in the banking or in the robotics environment, one of the components where we are working on right now. Within LSEC, we also try to innovate, and that innovation takes place together with our member companies, with partner companies, or even by ourselves. So one of the major aspects that we do is we help industries in their path to digital transformation. For us, of course, with a major focus on security, but also bring in some IoT sensors, industrial IoT sensors, digital platforms. And we developed together with some partners a tooling which allows those factories to do that easily and smoothly. And so here again, the challenge in relation to zero trust applies, because the device that we bring in and the platform and the dashboard that we bring in has to be trusted, of course, at some point in time by a specific person. In the domain of robotics, we took this concept even a step further, and we have a motto: do not trust a robot, do not trust your robots, simply for the reason that they are untrustworthy, because they have never been engineered to be trusted. They have never been engineered with the concepts of access control, of encryption. They have never been engineered in order to ensure that through data integrity, that also the safety of those robots can be guaranteed. So that's what we do within cybersecurity for robotics, and there's definitely some more coming up on this. So a couple of weeks ago, we started this webinar series to continue during the lockdown period, the transfer of this experience sharing and knowledge sharing. And we came up with quite a number of interesting topics, going from ransomware, which is of course still very actual, to being under attack as remote users, to 5G, and to things like IoT that we had a discussion about even last week. And then in our thrift series, we also focus on some other domains, like, for instance, how to implement IoT for manufacturing in a reasonable way. Today, the 7th session of our Identity and Access Management series, and it has gone a little bit up and down in terms of the zero knowledge, but it's in this case a bit of a combination of zero knowledge proof and zero knowledge trust. So the zero trust is basically what we will be talking about. Stefan, good morning. How are you doing today?
Good morning, Ulrich. I'm fine, thank you. Thanks for having me on this webinar.
Pleasure, and thanks for joining in, and thanks for joining also with a very interesting topic. So a couple of weeks ago, you posted some interesting ideas on LinkedIn, which caught our attention. And as we were looking for a strong victim to talk about, in this case, zero trust, then I think you were definitely the one that caught our attention, and that we invited as also one of our partners, being IBM, to be knowledgeable to talk about this concept of zero trust. I think you will be talking a little bit more about the enterprise security architectures and security and zero trust. So I'll hand over the word to you, and please share with us.
Yeah, thank you, Ulrich. And so, yes, indeed, the article I've published on securityintelligence.com was about the enterprise security architecture, because in my discussions the last months, I noticed that talking about zero trust, a lot of people directly jumps to the features and functions and the products. And with our team, we took one step back and we like think how do you approach it from an overall approach before we start installing products. And I hope I'm sharing the right screen, just checking that it's the Ulrich, you see
yes,
the right?
Confirmed. Yeah, we can
okay.
see. So you have the agenda now.
Yeah, okay, thanks. And so maybe quickly introduce myself for people not knowing me. I'm Stefan van Dalen. I'm a security architect within IBM Security Services. More than 30 years active in the IT, and of those 30 years, 23 with IBM already in the meantime. Time flies when you're having fun. And so in my current role, I'm a member of the European Cloud Security Competence Center, but also part-time, I'm leading an internal work group of security consultants where we define how we can implement zero trust-based solutions. That's why I will talk more about zero trust the latest weeks than about cloud security, but let's say that I'm actively involved in both topics. And so the agenda quickly, I will, to remove any confusion about the three topics you hear a lot of these days, I'll talk about, clarify that, then thanks for the introduction, Ulrich, you already explained very well what zero trust is about. I'll put some slides on that. I'll add also IBM's point of view, because I think it's important that we explain how we as security provider, we look at zero trust. And then I'll go a bit to a topic of today, which is how to apply zero trust in a security architecture. And so you see a lot of hypes, and some of them are very well documented, some of them, so people start confusing things. So I just want to set the scene from left to right. Zero trust is not new. I will come back to that later. It's a set of principles. It's more a paradigm, a philosophy, whatever you want to call it. I call it the North Star vision. It's a direction you want to go to. And it's not a one solution that covers all. It's just a list of actions and guidelines you want to implement to improve your security maturity. Zero knowledge proof, while it also has the word zero, it's a zero from total different context, is how you can share a known value to someone else without revealing other items or attributes about yourself. And so this you see a lot of coming up in the blockchain technology. IBM, I've put a link there, has put a very well article on how we use in a blockchain collaboration the zero knowledge proof, because the challenge with this encryption based protocol is it demands a lot of computing power, and thanks to blockchain there are better ways now to implement zero knowledge proof based solutions. And the last one you see also is trust over IP, and that's the name for a consortium, a coalition, sorry, I have to say, of a lot of organizations from both from the public sector as well from the industry, to come up with a standardized solution for decentralized identity. And so there was already the W3 standard about decentralized identity. What was missing is how do you set up relationships so you can have decentralized identity, which I think is also an interesting topic in this context of identity and access management, but not for today. And so today is about zero trust, and this is from Glassbergen. I'm a fan of Glassbergen, and it goes back from 2006. So it reminds me how long that this topic is already around. So you see that even sometimes hackers cannot trust the people from who they stole the data. So why zero trust? Zero trust, and I don't have to tell something new here, is we see this, how IT is so different than it was 20 years ago. So today your data is somewhere, it's on a mobile device, it's on a laptop, it's in your data center, it's on a cloud that you manage, or it's in a SaaS solution. So you need different ways to protect your data. And zero trust is one of those approaches, the guiding principles you could leverage to improve security maturity and improve access to that data in a controlled way. And so for me, if I talk about zero trust, it's not about getting there, having zero trust implemented on every connectivity between two systems, but my focus today with organizations is more get rid of as much as possible of the implicit trust. Today, too many organizations are relying on solutions which have a lot of implicit trust built in. And that comes from the legacy that we built through the years. So typically in the data centers, you split up the network in zones, but within a zone, most access you can freely wander around from a TCP/IP point of view. So once an adversary would be inside your organization, typically it can address any system that's within the same zone, and even while using some common protocols for system management, like Windows remote management protocols, it can even cross firewalls as well, because the management systems does that as well, also need to cross a firewall. So it's not because you get segmentation that you get sufficient protection. And so this evolution from centralized control of all your security to this distributed and fragmented, where there's almost no perimeter, is solutions where we're going. And I'm glad you showed the IoT examples earlier, Ulrich, because I'm pretty sure that the 5G and the Industry 4.0, the convergence of OT and IT worlds will even accelerate this vanishing perimeter phenomenon that we're seeing now for the last years. Another interesting challenge is if you talk about zero trust, every, I would say, actor in the security domain has his own approach, and all of them are okay, all of them are very well defined, but it's sometimes for organizations a little bit a challenge to identify which is now the right approach. Where should I look at the Forrester, how Forrester says you should implement zero trust, they coined the term in 2011. Should I use the Gartner model for continuous adaptive risk and trust assessment? No, that's CARTA. Google, when they looked at zero trust, they developed their own solution because there was nothing at the market at that time, and later on they sold it as a solution as well. It's known as BeyondCorp. And recently, NIST. And recently, I want to say, is NIST has come up with this draft publication about zero trust architecture. So a lot of opinions, a lot of views how zero trust could be or should be implemented in organizations. And so is zero trust really new? Well, as I said, Forrester coined the term in 2011, but if you look back even before that, there was something known as the Jericho Forum, and they published these commandments about this disappearing perimeter. And so if you look at zero trust, for me, it's a more defined way of what was already described in the Jericho Forum commandments. And that's from 2007, the latest version. So I would not call zero trust new, But the fact that today we have the capabilities, built-in technologies, makes zero trust based solutions realistic. While in those days, if you looked at the commandments, a lot of them were almost theoretical, abstract capabilities which you could not implement. And so what I do, and Elor has shown also principles, I took the one from the NIST. It's, as I said, it's not one solution. It's the idea is that you have a lot of resources, be it computing, be it laptops, whatever, robots, there are resources, and they connect with each other. And that communication should be secure, independent of that's now within your controlled data center or they are outside in the wild, I would call. So you need to establish secure communication. And also what we see too much today is that access to resources is not on a connection basis. It's just an implicit trust. You're in a workplace zone, so typically you can communicate with any other system which is in the workplace zone. You get access to systems in the production zone, then you might have access to many systems in the production zone. And also access is today typically defined by a one-time access control decision. The moment you log onto a system, you're a member of a role or a group that is checked against an access control list in the application or on the database, wherever the access control list would be applied to, and that's it. You get access and that's no longer challenged. And that's something that with zero trust, we want to get rid of, because this is an implicit trust that creates a lot of headaches for us as security consultants. So the authentication and the authorization should become a dynamic given, and it should be monitored over time. And so the other thing is that we, in the current solutions, we see these access decisions only defined by some static attributes, while they should take into account dynamic information as well. And that's where the AI systems and security monitoring systems will help us more in the future to make access decisions based on real-time information. And also you see here the last one, user authentication dynamics certainly enforced before access is allowed. Well, I would even want to go one step further in the future and say authentication in general. I think a lot of my colleagues would be happy if application to application communication would also be enforced in a risk-based access control way, and not like it's today based on a static list. And so, as I explained, the context is very essential for zero trust based solutions. It's you take into account who you are, who is the person accessing your data, but what are the conditions? Is he using the right device? Is a device managed by your organization? Has a device the latest malware, anti-malware solution? Has it a host-based firewall active and it's correctly configured? Has it a certificate that it allows him to connect to a network, and so on and so on? So you want to put the conditions. Some of them still are kind of static checks, but you also want to see what kind of dynamic attributes you could monitor as well. And on the other side, when he's accessing the system, what kind of access do that person need to perform his job? You see organizations giving too much access by default. We all know about the least privileged principle, but we still see that it's very hard for a lot of organizations to enforce that. And so by default, if you look at employees in any organization, they have too much access because of the changes they had within the organization. They changed roles and they built up a legacy of access rights, which they no longer need to perform the job. But having the context for access decisions is just a start, and that's why with IBM we try to define what we call a governance model. So we say, yes, you should define the context. That's just the baseline, the foundation to implement zero trust solutions. But then it comes across the hard parts. How do you verify and enforce access? And so what kind of capabilities do you need? for the different types of users, your employees, your customers, your privileged administrators in your organization. So in all those different contexts, you want to have these zero trust based solutions applied to. And then once you have established sessions, then you still should monitor them. It's not because someone of your employees access an HR database and he was member of the right group, that should not be validated during the course of the day. So you should have identified maybe something is happening strange with the network connectivity. Maybe you want to identify there is a session hijacking here and someone taking over the session of the person. So you have to improve also your security monitoring, and that information coming from security monitoring should help you to revoke access maybe, or challenge again the user why, if they are still the person they pretend to be at the beginning. So the improvement of security monitoring will help us also to imply zero trust. And like with all solutions, it's not a one-time implementations. You need some continuous improvement. So you have to see, how do I tune my policies? You might have some false positives at the beginning when you have these dynamic based access decisions. So you need this adjustment of your policies to ensure that you make the right access decisions. And if we look at the governance model, what we try to call here is that we say we have the three tenets. So you get the defined context, verify, enforce is where the action happens, resolve instance with all the security monitoring and the threat analysis happens. And then you get your layers of defense or your security domains. So you need for the user domain, where you want to see how set we the policies for the users, how we enforce the access, and how do we the monitoring of user access, but also the same for how do you protect your data, your applications, the devices, your endpoints, and the network. So the zero trust has to be applied at the different layers on one hand, and on the second hand, there you need much more integrations. In the past, security was implemented in a list of sequential security controls, and in a zero trust based solution, what you want to do is have an integrated set of security controls. So in an ideal case, you would have a kind of black box, a policy engine that checks all those aspects. And you see today more and more solutions are approaching this philosophy. Another thing with the IBM, what we said is that we should help organizations to implement zero trust. And as I said, it's a journey. We don't expect from all organizations in the different domains for the different aspects to have the highest maturity at day one. And also another analysis that we made talking to our customers is you don't start implementing some of those zero trust principles without doing the basics right. So when we typically in a lot of maturity assessments using CMMI or other maturity scales, we think zero trust starts when you are at level 2 at least, but more at the level 3. And so it's for organizations which are a very low maturity, they might win from a security point of view with basic security solutions. They don't maybe need that zero trust focus, as some of those zero trust implementations are very sophisticated and harder to achieve. So it's like with all of those security solutions, some of them are too high, and so you need to define the right fit. And that's why we're doing with IBM this maturity assessment for the verticals and the horizontal layers, while we try to identify what's the current maturity and how can we help your organization in function of the risks that they are facing to implement the right set of maturity. And as zero trust is covering almost all security domains, well, it covers all security domains. Another aspect that we found important is, where do we start? We don't want to boil the ocean. We don't want to implement zero trust principles for all the different domains in all the different IT environments at once. And so how we approach this is we take use cases. So with an organization that we implement zero trust, we walk them to the set of use cases. I'll show you an example of some key use cases we have identified, and we'll look how zero trust would improve that use case. And let me give you an example. So a very known use case these days with COVID-19 is the remote access for your employees. So a lot of organizations with the lockdown were forced. Some of them had to implement even in a rush VPNs for remote access because they hadn't yet the infrastructure. And so while it was for some organizations an abnormal or an exceptional use case, now it become almost the de facto standard for a lot of organizations. So we took this use case as an example. And if you look today, most organizations, how they set up remote access, they've set up a VPN. So they get a data center where the enterprise applications and enterprise data is typically stored. For a lot of organizations, that's still a valid pattern. They set up a VPN concentrator in the data center, and the employees access those enterprise applications through a VPN connectivity. So they get a VPN agent on their laptops. They have maybe two-factor authentication in place for the authentication. But if they access SaaS solutions, maybe, then they might go through the security components in the data center. Some organizations still doing that. And then they have security gateways and CASBs to control access to the internet. Some other organizations use this dual VPN, where they split internet traffic from enterprise traffic. And so in that case, the connectivity would be directly between the employee and the application using SaaS. And so you see there is a disconnected way how you approach your enterprise data, because it seems you get well control on the applications residing in the data center, but less on those which are in cloud-based solutions. And also the question is, how do you validate that session? So it's a one-time check that's done the moment this VPN is set up. And on the other hand, in the data center, the advantage of a VPN is also at the same time the disadvantage. The employee gets the same access as it would be at the office. So meaning he has access to a lot of applications and systems. He probably doesn't need to perform his job. So if you apply zero trust principles to this use case, then you see solutions called zero trust network access, also known as software-defined perimeter. And software-defined perimeter, it's still an agent-based solution, but now instead of exposing the internal network to the laptop of the employees remotely, you set up one point-to-point connections. So software-defined perimeter solutions allow you to first authenticate the user, authenticate the device, do a posture check of the device, and give the person access to applications based on application classification. That's typically rated also the kind of data those applications give access to. And so this SDB controller, where you get defined the policies, allow you to define in a fine-grained way which kind of employees, based on the role, what kind of device they are allowed to use, what's the other conditions you want to put there. And so instead of exposing the whole internal network to the device of the employee, you set up a point-to-point connection which is encrypted. So the person gets only access to those applications they need and nothing else anymore. And the advantage is you can use the same approach to access the applications in the cloud. So you now have one solution that gives the same type of access controls independent where the application, the data resides. Would it be in your data center or would it be somewhere in the cloud? And that's something that is a very nice implementation of the zero trust principles. Still, this can be improved further. So solutions today are using already a lot of context information to make access decisions. But for example, there is not yet an integration with your SIEM. If you have a security monitoring solution implemented and you would identify something abnormal with the device of the employee, that's something you want maybe also feedback to the solutions to make the access decision dynamic, like I explained earlier. That's as an intro on zero trust and how IBM's point of view on zero trust implementations could be achieved. Let me now, from a security architect point of view, walk you through the different design stages and how we can use Zero Trust to improve the security architecture. And first, and most of all, this when I talk to a lot of organizations in Europe, is this, so how do I start? All organizations have today a very diverse context. They have the data centers, they might have OT technology, they have for sure solutions in the cloud. And so the Zero Trust principles remain the same, but your starting point is different. The starting point is different if you apply the Zero Trust principles in a data center with a lot of legacy, a lot of technical debt, then you would start implementing Zero Trust in a public cloud solutions, which have out of the box a lot of capabilities. Also in cloud, Zero Trust principles should be applied for the different type of use cases in your cloud. You get your DevOps teams, which have a lot of access to cloud through what we call to the control plane, while your employees or your customers might access the same cloud with what we call the data plane. So it's different network connectivities, wherein in both you should look, how can I implement Zero Trust principles to improve the maturity? And the maturity, again, as I shown on the right, what we do with IBM is for all the different crossings of the different stages and the domains, we try to identify where is the organization standing today for this specific use case. So it's a use case based assessment we try to do. So we implement Zero Trust for that specific use case, and once that's successfully and working as it should, then you can scale out to other use cases. And then third focus on implementing Zero Trust is what I call upgrade the way access decisions are made. And so that's where it should start, is how are access decisions made, independent where, at which level it is, and can they be dynamic instead of one-time static decisions? And that's not easy. It's easier to do that for web applications than for privileged access, than for application-to-application communication over API. And if I look from an enterprise security architecture, that's the domain I'm now active for more than 15 years, is the, this is a very generic model that I'm using here. So you got on the top your contextual layer, what's all the input you take as a security architect. So you get the requirements for the business units, you got the threats you need to cope with, you have to comply with regulations. And then you establish a governance model where you get your design principles, you have the security policies that give the starting point, and then you define the different layers of architecture. So the conceptual layer, logical architecture with all the building blocks, and finally the detailed design of what we call the physical architecture. And once it's implemented, of course, you need to say how you're going to monitor and govern that solution in operations. So you get security operations that you need to design as well. And you're luckily in these days, we're no longer alone on our island. There is a lot of material available. So you get security control framework, best practice, and so on that you can use as input to define that solutions. So what we're doing now with IBM Security Services is we used our Zero Trust governance model to accelerate that. So we provide input to help you to build those architecture with predefined solutions. So applying the Zero Trust is a set of principles, as I said, so that fits perfectly within the ASA because we have used already guiding principles. What we would do in a Zero Trust based architecture is focus on those Zero Trust principles. And you will notice I also put the privacy by design principles. So I give the zero knowledge proof and the trust over IP also their place in an enterprise security design. But also with IBM Security, we try to define what we call Zero Trust solution patterns. So what are patterns we see coming back on different occasions? And let me walk you through this and give you some examples. So a first example would be looking at the threat catalog. Most organizations have identified the relevant threats, and that's something they do on a continuous basis. So you use a threat intelligence, and out of the threat catalog, you typically create what we call a risk register. Which are the risks coming from those threats, and how do you manage those risks? And from a security architecture point of view, what you then want to do is you want to define what we call risk mitigation patterns. What kind of solutions can help you to mitigate the risk to bring back to an acceptable level? And so those patterns bring you a set of capabilities and building blocks you will need to define a solution. So let me walk you through the steps. So as I said, you create, the organization typically has a threat catalog based from different sources. You do the risk analysis, and you have a risk register, and then there is a prioritization. And for this example, let me take the ransomware attack, which was a topic earlier in this series of webinars. And so if you apply the zero trust principles, how would they help you to protect your organization against possible ransomware attacks? And so for the different stages, define context, verifying force, resolve incidents, we look at things like micro-segmentations. We look at like, can we improve our security monitoring? How do we address the privileged access? Because you will see also in ransomware attacks, typically there happens a kind of hijacking or abuse of privileged access to proliferate and distribute amongst the organization. And then once these principles are clear, how is the security architecture team use those patterns and other sources to implement them? And so there are known solutions like host-based micro-segmentations. You want to implement privileged account session management instead of just using a password vault for privileged access. And all those conceptual solutions help you to create then the logical architecture with the building blocks. And the advantage of this is that you're doing consolidation. So you should think like this. On one hand, you get your list of risks in a matrix, let's say. On the other hand, you get your mitigation patterns. And you will see, if you define the mitigation patterns, that there is some of those capabilities you will use to address more than one risk. And so that's where the conceptual architecture really helps you. It helps you to create a complete view of capabilities you need to address those risks, but also it helps you to consolidate the requirements and the solutions. So it avoids that you have redundant solutions, and it helps you also to get a very efficient approach towards the solution. Another aspect would be the leverage of conceptual frameworks. And also there, in the zero trust context, there's a lot of material already shown earlier, is the recent publication from NIST about the zero trust architecture, where they introduce this concept of the policy engine. So the policy engine and the policy enforcement point between a resource and a system or connecting to that resource. That's the conceptual solution. And so what kind of information is used to make that decisions? It's any information you could use. So it's coming from your SIEM, it comes from identity management solution, it comes from your data classification and the type of access you would allow. It comes from solutions like continuous diagnostics and mitigation solutions, which tells you something about the vulnerabilities of the system that you're accessing or that's used to access the system. And the logs. So there's a lot of information in an ideal zero trust world you want to use to make access decisions. And that's described in this publication, which I give the reference. Now, the idea of a policy engine and a generic policy enforcement point is not new. So in the open group a while back in 2011, they published something called the Open Enterprise Security Architecture Module. And also there, they defined is what they call the policy-driven security conceptual architecture. It's the same idea. You get a lot of information that you can use. You get your policies defined, who should be able to access which type of a resource, and you get policy enforcement points. And so the information both from the initiator, the system connecting to as the target, the resource you want to access, that all information on both sides is used to make the final access decisions. So from an security monitoring point of view, it's not only about the health state of the target, it's not only about the health state of the initiator, the laptop of the employee, for example, it's about both, and both elements should be used to making an access decision. Another conceptual view is on cloud. If you look at cloud, as I said before, zero trust should be applied at the different ways that cloud is accessed. So typically you get your operations teams and the DevOps teams accessing resources here in the public cloud through what we call the control plane. So it can be API based, it can be even still with direct access to virtual machines, while we would not recommend it, but it's still possible. And it's through the cloud portal as well. While your employees and your customers would access it, these applications developed or running on the cloud through what we call the data plane. So also there, you want to see what kind of capabilities should we need to implement access solutions based on the zero trust principles. What you would typically not address unless you're a cloud service provider is the management plane. The management plane is where the cloud service provider will control all those infrastructure components providing the public cloud services. I assume and I hope that cloud service providers also use zero trust principles when they define the access control in the management plane. And let me go a little bit further. So if you look at zero control frameworks, there are a lot of security control frameworks. So also those frameworks can help you to define the security components and the security capabilities you need in your solution. A very famous one is the NIST cybersecurity framework. And so what we looked at it from IBM and we said, okay, it maps first well with our governance model, but more importantly, if you look at this, what is it, about 100 controls, I think not all those controls are, I would say, in support of the zero trust principles. It's not that those controls are not important or not relevant, but if you have a zero trust focus, then you would start with those controls which are direct in support of the zero trust principles. Similar with best practices, one of the known best practices is the MITRE attack framework. So while it's a knowledge base, it comes with techniques, how typically adversaries are trying to break in infrastructures. It also comes with mitigation actions. And if you look at these mitigation actions, some of them, again, relate very well back to the zero trust principles. I took one mitigation example here, network segmentation. And then if you look at the MITRE technology base on this mitigation, then you will see that it comes again with a lot of techniques that are addressed by this mitigation. And again, I took one example, Windows remote management. So here they give the example, okay, probably you can't stop Windows remote management. So then you should consider to have host-based firewalls that help you to limit the number of connections using Windows remote management. And so that's in a nutshell how you could use zero trust to the different stages of security architecture. I would like to wrap up here. I've got a slide with URLs for people who want to read more about zero trust. On securityintelligence.com, there is a lot of articles all looking at zero trust from their specific angle. But I hope you find this presentation useful, and I give you some good idea how you could apply zero trust while defining security solutions.
All right. Thank you very much, Stefan. That was a very interesting and an insightful perspective. So I think from my end, probably the biggest question I would have here is in practice, what is it that you should be doing? You gave a couple of interesting hints, but it remains to the level of policy consideration. So if you would say that people, organizations would need to start implementing this concept of zero trust, where should they really start? Is I think the biggest question that probably we would have. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, and it's a very good question, because that's the same question that we also get from the organizations we talk to about zero trust. So, and again, I think I said we don't want to boil the ocean. What we typically say, let's look from a risk point of view, what kind of risks are you addressing? And then the other aspect we look is what are the kind of use case which are most applicable to your organization. And so we try to identify where are the highest risks and what are the most common use cases. And so what we then do is we implement for this specific use case, we look at, okay, if we apply the zero principles fully to that use case, what would that change? How would that improve the security maturity overall? And we start to focus with the implementation for this specific use case. And once that provides its added value and it helps you to improve the security posture, then we scale out to other use cases in organization. So we try to avoid to one-size-fits-all approach. So we say here we start with zero trust and we do everything. It's not the way that we cope. So we want to start step by step. It's a journey. As I said, for me, zero trust is more a North Star, a direction you want to go to. So that's one aspect. So select a specific use case. And the other hand is, you know that you should take every opportunity when they're changing and transformations are taking place. You should take these mini steps with you. So we should, in the design teams, the project teams should have a set of guiding principles of zero trust solutions. If you put the bar high, you could say you could write for a given domain authentications, you give 3 possible solutions, and you should say strive to go for the highest bar, but maybe it's okay if you just take the first level of, so you make the changes happening by implementing every change that's happening in the organization. So that are the 2 ways that we propose to organizations to implement zero trust.
If let's say that we turn it around, okay, so you say, okay, take it from a risk management perspective, but what about what would be the major business case to move from a traditional model towards a zero trust model? I mean, what would be really the driving factor? And Ben is asking here on the chat, won't this type of architecture be much more costly? So in terms of that versus whatever you can define as a classical architecture.
Yeah, no, indeed, good question. So if the example I give about remote access, I think it's even, I didn't make any cost calculation, but I think it would be more efficient if you say I would go to a zero trust network access based solution, because now you have to set up a local infrastructure of VPNs and you still don't cover all the accesses for your employees. So while you've invested in a local VPN infrastructure that you need to maintain, you're only managing your remote access for your applications within the enterprise. And you might say, yes, but force my employees to go to the VPN and then out back to access. That's probably not the most efficient way either. So when you move to a software-defined perimeter solution, you get rid of these infrastructures in your data center and you still improve the security maturity. So I think it depends a little bit where the urgent needs are. It could be for a manufacturing company that they first want to tackle the challenges they have in the OT environment. I'm not saying that maybe the remote access for employees would be perfect, but it depends a little bit. So is it more costly? No, I don't think so. And the other reason I'm hammering all the time on the architecture approaches, when you will see the risk register and the mitigation patterns, you will see that you can reuse patterns, and reuse means for me efficiency and probably reducing cost as well.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and so maybe to put it also much more concrete, are there some organizations that you can that you know of which have implemented this, and what sort of their additional benefit now is? Is it maybe some specific sectors that you see? Like, I think this would apply without a doubt into financial services organizations, or at least parts of them.
I can confirm that I'm speaking to organizations in Europe in all sectors about zero trust. Zero trust is on the agenda of CISOs of totally different organizations in the different industries. So I see it in finance, I see it insurance, manufacturing, petrochemical. So I've seen examples and questions coming from those different organizations, and it's as I said, it's a little bit maybe the opposite. Now we have these technologies available from different security vendors, including IBM and others, that you also organizations see now the benefit of implementing it. As I said, 10 years ago, zero trust was much more a principle. It's no a coincidence that Google decided to create their own Beyond Corp solution. There was no such thing as a policy engine that would make access decisions. So, but Google was, let's say, one of the first organizations, I think, to get rid of the VPN approach for remote access for the employees. And so, and now I see a lot of organizations looking at zero trust as a way to improve the maturity. It's a focus that already should have existed in organizations. I think now the capabilities are there. They see it makes sense to start implementing those zero trust based solutions.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I think that's especially from the network side, I would say. I mean those types of implementations, those types of solutions, as you call them, indeed do exist. So I think from that perspective onwards, going beyond, let's say, the traditional perimeter concept is definitely fine. Also, the policy engines and the central command units make lots of sense there. In the cases that you showed here for enterprise security architecture, one of the challenges that we are seeing and having today is really about how to manage, how to maintain, how to secure the different APIs from let's say a total digitalization concept of an enterprise, any type of organization. So in that case, or in this particular case where we know, okay, our risks really are the fact that we need to connect to other web services, we need to connect to other enterprise where we don't always know who's behind those controls. So how can we ensure this level of security? And we will be taking a zero risk and a zero trust policy there. So is that a way, and how then to implement?
Yeah, no, and you make the right point. So API-based access is a challenge from a zero trust point of view, because not much technologies can help you there. So the focus you would rely back on what I said, the microsegmentation, to avoid, for example, lateral movement, or to ensure that there is a point-to-point connection only possible. Because all these risk-based access solutions are focused on what I would call interactive logons, people accessing systems. Those same policy engine approach with risk-based access is not yet applied at the API level. I would love to see solutions doing that. But if you look like the solutions in containers with the service mesh and sidecar implementations like Istio, you could argue that's kind of zero trust principle applying, because you really want to limit communication between two applications running somewhere on a container. But it's, again, you try to, by point-to-point connections, getting control on what's happening there. So, but it's not yet risk-based access control at the API layer. But I think that's still a domain where we will have to wait till technologies allow us to do that.
Yeah. Okay. So in the near future, how do you see zero trust evolving? I think as a principle, the way that we definitely get feedback, at least from the different CISOs that we talk to, basically all of them apply the concept. But there has to be a level of trust, of course, with some entities. And so I think one of the challenges, for instance, that I see is that a risk manager, a CISO, has a challenge in understanding what the risk level is that he might have with one or more of his suppliers in this case. So the extended enterprise in that sense. And he does an assessment on his third parties, and there he sees immediately, okay, here we have a number of suppliers, maybe 10%, that are scoring relatively positive in terms of the way they treat risks, and that's purely from an outside perspective. So not even going into assessing or doing compliance verifications or whatever, but purely from that perspective. And then the majority of them, 80% at least, is not really to be considered trustworthy. So in such a way, we see definitely that there's this concept that has matured. But then the next step is again, okay, now we have to implement this. We have to make this very concrete. So how do you start doing this?
Yeah, I think in the future what we will see is more and more the uses of AI as well to make those access decisions. So I think for the interactive logons, to get rid of the false positives, I think AI will come to the rescue at term, so we can use much more information in a faster way. I think that's a valid case. So today it's still a lot of rule and policy based, and we will see the tendency also here to evolve to access decisions take into account a lot of information and using AI to make those access decisions and learn from those access decisions. And on the other hand, I see the policy engine will become something that can be applied to smaller IT systems like the OT world, like in API to communication. So I hope that we will see in the future the policy engine with this risk-based access principles also happening for non-interactive authentication, so system-to-system communication. I think that are the two evolutions that we will see in the future.
Yeah, okay. So I think Ben is also referring to the fact that he hopes that, it's maybe not really a hope, but he asks, do you know if manufacturers started to embed this concept into their products? So definitely true for device manufacturers, I'd say, but likely to a lesser extent from the software vendors in that sense.
Yeah, well, it's if you look at the zero trust market, if I would call it that way, there is a lot of vendors in that domain. So, but it's evolving very fast. So I do expect that there will be changes in the future as well. I think a lot of we all see the benefit of applying zero trust principles, and so I think we'll see also in the future the two domains I mentioned, using a policy engine at system-to-system communication and using AI to support access decisions. I think the two evolutions that you will see in the near future.
Yeah. So in the Daniel was also asking if we have, for instance, a small industrial company that should prepare the protection architecture with a small network, a few computers, and what steps or solutions should they take into consideration? Would it be sensible there to start from a zero trust networking architecture?
Yeah, well, again, indeed, it all depends. So every change you can make that is applying zero trust to a certain extent is a step forward. So let's take privileged access. And for smaller companies or small organizations, I would say start with privileged access. How do you address do you know your privileged users? Are they logged on a whole day with a privileged account? So can you reduce already the need for privileged access? Can you get control? And also for small organizations, there are SaaS solutions that provide privileged access management solution. So I would start with the smaller things. It's the other thing is like network segmentations. Smaller network, you probably won't split it up in 100 zones, but you can already think like, what kind of applications are you using? What is the group of components member of the same applications? So you try to see, can we identify a zone related to an application? And then there are solutions that do host-based segmentations, which are scalable. I mean, they are applicable for a small network and they're applicable for a large network as well. So yes, there also for small organizations, there are solutions they can start. And sometimes it's just with the basics. As I said, sometimes we say, yes, you should go for zero trust, but maybe get the basics right. If you have your own small data center components, Well, do you have an up-to-date CMDB? Do you know which components you should be able to control? Are you applying your what we call the security hygiene of those systems? The latest patches, are they installed? So nothing to do with zero trust per se, but if you don't know what you control, why should you try to improve the security maturity first? So that there is still some things to take in account. And I said my focus will be on segmentation, on host-based level if possible, and get control on the privileged access first.
Okay, so I'd say final question in this case, you partially already answered it in how do you see, let's say, what would be the brightest future for zero trust in this case? Is there going to be a future whereby let's say all of the people in the security domain, as paranoid as we are, can work on zero trust? And is it also from purely a societal perspective something that could be workable? I mean, you can even consider it as a sort of an ethical question. Is there a world whereby we should continue not to trust each other and basically find means where in the end the continuous trust has to be proven on the basis of electronic means? And yeah. I think if we can do it in this networking environment, we can also do it on a physical basis. The moment that you are in proximity of a person, I mean, let's take the Corona apps. So the assessment of, is a person nearby you maybe contaminated? Does he have the virus? All sorts of warnings could go off. I've seen already now in the small amount of visits I've taken in enterprises, people walking around with small buzzers, just indicating you're too close to me, even if you're not contaminated, but you're still too close to me. So here's a warning. Yeah. So how do you see this evolving, at least in the domain of security here? Should we become more paranoid, or should we just still trust each other?
No, I think, and that's why I don't like the term zero trust from that point of view. It's not about zero trust. You need, at the end, you establish a trust level before you can establish communication. The only thing is that you should have those controls built in a transparent way for end users, so it doesn't create too much noise and friction with your end user, but you should still do all the security checks in a dynamic way. And so I rather see it, as I said in the beginning also, I see it rather get rid of the implicit trust, which is built in for years and years. So let's first clean up, I would say, how we made designs in the past, building too much implicit trust, too much trust, which is convenient. It's always easy if you give all your employees privileged access to all systems, not much to manage them anymore, but you know what the result will be. But you should find this compromise, let's say, between how much controls can you do before you allow connection. You won't stop the business. You will be very prudent in applying zero trust towards your customers and your consumers. I mean, you don't want to create friction with customers, but you still want to be sure that there is not someone pretending to be a trustworthy customer. So that's the balance you always have to take. So, but for employees, you can do more. For privileged access and your privileged accounts, you can do even much more security controls. So it depends the use case, the population you're talking to. So don't look at, it's not about not trusting anymore. It's establishing a trust in a control way, and do that control in a dynamic way, and not a one-time decision you took early in the morning.
Okay, so I think Stefan, you've been very good at explaining us about the different challenges, about the concepts, about the ideas, even about how to apply. So I'd say we are very grateful from you for doing this and sharing with us this morning all these very insightful ideas. So I'd say definitely a major thank you to do this and to join us in this early morning webinar. I'd say also we are likely to come back to you with some more questions on the topic once it has also matured a little bit further in this space. And once we might also see some particular use cases that can be applied for it. So I'd say again, I hope to see you back soon, working on similar types of ideas, and I definitely hope to be able to see you back again, maybe at another topic like the zero knowledge proof, for instance, in this case, which is maybe also still a topic that we might be carrying.
Yeah, okay. It was a pleasure to be here and speak to you soon.
All right, thanks a lot. And for all of the listeners out there, our next webinar will be announced likely pretty soon. With the holiday periods, I think we are slowing it down a little bit ourselves. We also have a couple of challenges and deadlines to meet, but we will be back soon with some new topics and ideas. Some likely to be on how to further mature and operate and improve the SOC operations with some advanced new technologies and tools. So with this, I'd say thanks a lot for participating, wishing you a good rest of the holidays, and stay safe, of course, that we hopefully will be able to meet again in person in the fall. Bye.